Welcome back, everyone. Earlier this week, I provided you with a video lecture to help you get started with your essay. And this gave you a checklist for things that you would want to do as you prepare to write your third essay. If you recall, it ended with us looking at what the structure of an essay would look like for this upcoming project. Now, what I want to do is I want to show you how to write what we call a synthesis paragraph. That is, a paragraph that synthesizes more than one secondary resource. And as a reminder, for your third essay, you're going to want the majority of your body paragraphs to synthesize at least two sources. All right, so let's get started. Again, as a reminder, at the end of our last lecture, we talked about what an outline for my third essay might look like. And so I provided it. I'm providing it to you here again. What you can see is that my third essay will consist of a few different pieces. One is the introduction, and it's going to end in a thesis. And if you recall, I'm answering a question from several years ago. My working thesis for that question is I believe the US should allow in Syrian refugees. For this paper, I'm then going to have three paragraphs providing supporting evidence. Those paragraphs will be based around three different reasons for my argument. Body paragraph 1 is going to discuss that Syrians pose a minimal threat to U.S. safety. Body paragraph 2 is going to argue that immigration is a part of our national heritage. And body paragraph number 3 is going to argue that during World War II, the U.S. refused to admit Jewish refugees and that this legacy has been a source of national shame. And then I'll conclude the paper. All right, so now that we are reminded of what the broad outline of the paper is, let's start to think about what an individual synthesis paragraph would look like. All right, so on this slide, what you'll notice is that on the left-hand side is the box for body paragraph number 1. In that paragraph, I'm going to be arguing that Syrians pose a minimal threat to U.S. safety. On the right is what my outline is going to look like. That is what all the moves are that I need to make in order to create a synthesis paragraph. Paragraphs that synthesize two sources can be structured this way. One is they'll begin with a transitional sentence that will provide a claim for the paragraph. Then they're going to provide a quotation sandwich for their first source. So that means that they will introduce the quote, they'll give the quote or paraphrase, and then they'll explain or analyze the quote. Then the paragraph will have a sentence transitioning from the first source to the second source. Then I'll include a quotation sandwich for the second source. And then finally, I'll include a sentence that shows the connection between these two sources. All right? So basically, a synthesis paragraph consists of two quotation or paraphrase sandwiches that are strung together with first a transitional sentence, then after the first quote, a sentence transitioning to the second quote, and then after the second quotation sandwich, some kind of a sentence showing the connection between those sources. All right, let's look at what this looks like in a real paper. All right, so on the left-hand side, you'll see a column that contains all those steps that we just went over. On the right-hand side is what a paragraph might look like, what the sentences might look like in a synthesis paragraph. So here it goes. Again, this is going to be the first body paragraph in an essay about Syrian refugees. It's going to argue that Syrians pose a minimal threat to U.S. safety, because that's one of my reasons. The first thing that I need to do is I need to provide a transitional sentence which provides a claim for the entire paragraph. And here I've done it. I say, contrary to meta citizens' concerns, Syrian refugees do not pose a threat to American safety. All right. Now that I've written that transitional sentence, I need to provide my first quotation sandwich for my first source. So here it is. It's written in green. All right. Contrary to many citizens' concerns, Syrian refugees do not pose a threat to American safety. In Trump and Syrian Refugees in the U.S., Separating Facts from Fiction, Lauren Gambino argues that Syrians are one of the safest groups of U.S. immigrants. Quote, the State Department has said that Syrians flown to the U.S. are among the most heavily vetted group of people currently allowed into the country. End quote. Page 2. According to Gambino, such vetting involves screening from numerous agencies that takes, quote, an average of 18 months to 2 years. This stringent process is bound to uncover any potential criminals or would-be terrorists among Syrian asylum seekers. And what you can see is this is a classic quotation sandwich. What I have here in the first sentence is the introduction to the quote. In the second sentence is the quote itself. And then in the third and fourth sentence is an explanation of that quote. All right, so what I have now in my paragraph is my transitional or topic sentence at the beginning, my first quotation sandwich. Now I need a sentence transitioning from the first to the second source. And here it is in blue. Indeed, supporters of the U.S. refugee program point out that American fears about potential Syrian terrorists ignore the realities of the refugees' experience in their home country. So this is going to provide that transition from the first source to the second source. Now I need to provide a quotation sandwich for that second source. And here it is. It's written in purple. According to Eric Bradner and Ted Barrett in Republicans to Obama Keep Syrian Refugees Out, end quote, President Obama has been quick to point out that Syrian refugees are more likely to be victims than perpetrators. Quote, the people who are fleeing Syria are the most harmed by terrorism, end quote. Obama quoted in Bradner and Barrett, page 2. In other words, Syrian refugees are unlikely to be terrorists because they have experienced terrorism and can measure its cost in the loss of friends, family, and personal safety. And again, what you'll notice is this is a full quotation sandwich. This first sentence is meant to introduce the quote. Then I include the quote. And here I include some meta-commentary about the quote. That is, I include meta-commentary in order to provide an explanation for the quote. All right, so now that I have my second quote, I need to end the paragraph with some type of a sentence or two that shows the connection between my sources. And I've written that sentence in purple. It says, taken together, Bradner and Barrett and Gambino suggest that Syrian refugees are a highly selective group composed of people who are so motivated to flee violence that they would not only risk starting over in a new country, but are also willing to submit to up to 2 years of stringent background checks. And what this last sentence does is it provides a little bit of a kind of summary of the earlier points that I've made, but more importantly, it shows that connection between those two sources, and that's actually where the synthesis takes place. So I'm going to read the full paragraph to you so you can see how it operates. Now I've written each sentence in different colors so you can see how they fulfill those different steps in the structure. Here it is. Contrary to many citizens' concerns, Syrian refugees do not pose a threat to American safety. In Trump and the Syrian Refugees in the U.S., Separating Facts from Fiction, Lauren Gambino argues that Syrians are one of the safest groups of U.S. immigrants. Quote, the State Department has said that Syrians flown to the U.S. are among the most heavily vetted group of people currently allowed in the country. According to Gambino, such vetting involves screenings from numerous agencies that, quote, takes an average of 18 months to 2 years, end quote. This stringent process is bound to uncover any potential criminals or would-be terrorists among Syrian asylum seekers. Indeed, supporters of the U.S. refugee program point out that American fears about potential Syrian terrorists ignore the realities of the refugees' experience in their home country. According to Eric Bradner and Ted Barrett in Republicans to Obama Keep Syrian Refugees Out, President Obama has been quick to point out that Syrian refugees are more likely to be victims than perpetrators. Quote, the people who are fleeing Syria are the most harmed by terrorism, end quote. In other words, Syrian refugees are unlikely to be terrorists because they experience terrorism and can measure its cost in the loss of friends, family, and personal safety. Taken together, Bradner and Barrett and Gambino suggest that Syrian refugees are a highly selective group composed of people so motivated to flee violence that they would not only risk starting over in a new country, but are willing to submit to up to 2 years of stringent background checks. All right? I hope this makes sense about how you structure a synthesis paragraph. The whole point of creating a synthesis paragraph is to draw on different sources and to show a connection that exists between those sources, because it will help to enrich your argument. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the strategy that I used in the above paragraph, because it matters how you sort of combine different sources. In the above example, I used one of what are actually multiple strategies. The strategy that I used in the above example is to provide two sources that essentially agree with one another. In the above example, they each provided information that agreed with the idea that Syrians pose no threat. But this isn't the only strategy that I can adopt when I'm using two sources. I've included some other possible strategies in this last slide. So, the first strategy is that one source can explain or can analyze the second source. That is, that the first source might provide a kind of general tenet that then gets discussed in more detail or analyzed in more detail by the second source. Another strategy is that the first source could refute or could disagree with the second source. In essence, you would be setting up a naysayer, but doing so through two different sources. And the third option is that one source can either, both agree and disagree with the second source. So, the first source could offer a general idea. The second source could point out how some pieces of that idea are correct and how some pieces are incorrect. All right. So what I provided for you is a structure that you can use to model your own synthesis paragraphs on, as well as some strategies that you may want to adopt when you're creating synthesis paragraphs. Again, as a reminder, for your third essay, you should plan that the majority of your body paragraphs are synthesizing two different sources. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I'll look forward to talking with you on the discussion board.